There are, Nastenka, though you may not know it, strange nooks in Petersburg. It seems as though the same sun as shines for all Petersburg people does not peep into those spots, but some other different new one, bespoken expressly for those nooks, and it throws a different light on everything. In these corners, dear Nastenka, quite a different life is lived, quite unlike the life that is surging round us, but just such as perhaps exists in some unknown realm, not among us in our serious, over-serious time. Well, that life is a mixture of something purely fantastic, fervently ideal, with something dingily prosaic and ordinary, not to say incredibly vulgar. Phew, good heavens, what a preface! What do I hear? Listen, Nastenka. It seems to me I shall never be tired of calling you Nastenka. Let me tell you that in these corners live strange people, dreamers. The dreamer, if you want an exact definition, is not a human being, but a creature of an intermediate sort. For the most part, he settles in some inaccessible corner, as though hiding from the light of day. Once he slips into his corner, he grows to like it like a snail, or anyway, he is in that respect very much like that remarkable creature, which is an animal and a house both at once, and is called a tortoise. Why do you suppose he is so fond of his four walls, which are invariably painted green, grimy, dismal, and reeking unpardonably of tobacco smoke? Why is it that when this absurd gentleman is visited by one of his few acquaintances, why does this absurd person meet him with such embarrassment, changing countenance and overcome with confusion, as though he had only just committed some crime within his four walls, as though he had been forging counterfeit notes, or as though he were writing verses to be sent to a journal with an anonymous letter in which he states that the real poet is dead, and that his friend thinks it his sacred duty to publish his things? Why, tell me, Nastenka, why is it conversation is not easy between the two friends? Why is there no laughter? Why does no lively word fly from the tongue of the perplexed newcomer, who at other times may be very fond of laughter, lively words, conversation about the fair sex, and other cheerful subjects? And why does this friend, probably a new friend and on his first visit, for there will hardly be a second, and the friend will never come again, why is the friend himself so confused, so tongue-tied, in spite of his wit, if he has any, as he looks at the downcast face of his host, who, in his turn, becomes utterly helpless and at his wit's end after gigantic but fruitless efforts to smooth things over and enliven the conversation, to show his knowledge of polite society, to talk, too, of the fair sex, and by such humble endeavor to please the poor man, who, like a fish out of water, has mistakenly come to visit him? Why does the gentleman, all at once remembering some very necessary business which never existed, suddenly seize his hat and hurriedly make off, snatching away his hand from the warm grip of his host, who is trying his utmost to show his regret and retrieve the lost position? Why does the friend chuckle as he goes out of the door, and swear never to come and see this queer creature again, though the queer creature is really a very good fellow, and at the same time he cannot refuse his imagination the little diversion of comparing the queer fellow's countenance during their conversation with the expression of an unhappy kitten, treacherously captured, roughly handled, frightened, and subjected to all sorts of indignities by children, till, utterly crestfallen, it hides away from them under a chair in the dark, and there must needs at its leisure bristle up, spit, and wash its insulted face with both paws, and long afterwards look angrily at life and nature, and even at the bits saved from the master's dinner for it by the sympathetic housekeeper. Listen, interrupted Nastenka, who had listened to me all the time in amazement, opening her eyes and her mouth. Listen. I don't know in the least why it happened, and why you ask me such absurd questions. All I know is that this adventure must have happened word for word to you. Doubtless, I answered with the gravest face. Well, since there is no doubt about it, go on, said Nastenka, because I want very much to know how it will end. You want to know, Nastenka, what our hero, that is I, for the hero of the whole business was my humble self, did in his corner? You want to know why I lost my head and was upset for the whole day by the unexpected visit of a friend? You want to know why I was so startled, why I blushed when the door of my room was opened, why I was not able to entertain my visitor, and why I was crushed under the weight of my own hospitality? Why, yes, answered Nastenka. That's the point. Listen, you describe it all splendidly, but couldn't you perhaps describe it a little less splendidly? You talk as though you were reading it out of a book. Nastenka, I answered in a stern and dignified voice, hardly able to keep from laughing. Dear Nastenka, I know I describe splendidly, but excuse me, I don't know how else to do it. At this moment, dear Nastenka, at this moment I am like the spirit of King Solomon, when after lying 1,000 years under 7 seals in his urn, those 7 seals were at last taken off. At this moment, Nastenka, when we have met at last after such a long separation, for I have known you for ages, Nastenka, because I have been looking for someone for ages, and that is a sign that it was you I was looking for, and it was ordained that we should meet now. At this moment 1,000 valves have opened in my head, and I must let myself flow in a river of words, or I shall choke. And so I beg you not to interrupt me, Nastenka, but listen humbly and obediently, or I will be silent. No, not at all. Go on, I won't say a word. I will continue. There is, my friend Nastenka, 1 hour in my day which I like extremely. That is the hour when almost all business, work, and duties are over, and everyone is hurrying home to dinner, to lie down, to rest, and on the way all are cogitating on other, more cheerful subjects relating to their evenings, their nights, and all the rest of their free time. At that hour our hero, for allow me, Nastenka, to tell my story in the third person, for one feels awfully ashamed to tell it in the first person. So at that hour, our hero, who had his work too, was pacing along after the others. But a strange feeling of pleasure set his pale, rather crumpled-looking face working. He looked not with indifference on the evening glow which was slowly fading on the cold Petersburg sky. When I say he looked, I am lying. He did not look at it, but saw it as if were without realizing, as though tired or preoccupied with some other more interesting subject, so that he could scarcely spare a glance for anything about him. He was pleased because till next day he was released from business irksome to him, and happy as a schoolboy let out from the classroom to his games and mischief. Take a look at him, Nastenka. You will see at once that joyful emotion has already had an effect on his weak nerves and morbidly excited fancy. You see, he is thinking of something. Of dinner, do you imagine? Of the evening? What is he looking at like that? It is at that gentleman of dignified appearance, who is bowing so picturesquely to the lady who rolls by in a carriage drawn by prancing horses? No, Nastenka. What are all those trivialities to him now? He is rich now with his own individual life. He has suddenly become rich, and it is not for nothing that the fading sunset sheds its farewell gleam so gaily before him, and calls forth a swarm of impressions from his warmed heart. Now he hardly notices the road on which the tiniest details at other times would strike him. Now the goddess of fancy, if you have read Zhukovsky, dear Nastenka, has already with fantastic hands spun her golden warp and begun weaving upon it patterns of marvelous magic life. And who knows, maybe her fantastic hand has borne him to the 7th crystal heaven, far from the excellent granite pavement on which he was walking his way. Try stopping him now. Ask him suddenly where he is standing now, through what streets he is going. He will probably remember nothing, neither where he is going nor where he is standing now, and flushing with vexation, he will certainly tell some lie to save appearances. That is why he starts, almost cries out, and looks round with horror when a respectable old lady stops him politely in the middle of the pavement and asks her way. Frowning with vexation, he strides on, scarcely noticing that more than one passer-by smiles and turns round to look after him, and that a little girl, moving out of his way in alarm, laughs aloud, gazing open-eyed at his broad meditative smile and gesticulations. But fancy catches up, in its playful flight, the old woman, the curious passers-by and the laughing child, and the peasants spending their nights in their barges on Fontanka, and capriciously weaves every one and everything into the canvas like a fly in a spider's web. And it is only after the queer fellow has returned to his comfortable den with fresh stores for his mind to work on, has sat down and finished his dinner, that he comes to himself. When Matrona, who waits upon him, always thoughtful and depressed, clears the table and gives him his pipe, he comes to himself then, and recalls with surprise that he has dined, though he has absolutely no notion how it has happened. It has grown dark in the room. His soul is sad and empty. The whole kingdom of fancies drops to pieces about him, drops to pieces without a trace, without a sound, floats away like a dream, and he cannot himself remember what he was dreaming. But a vague sensation faintly stirs his heart and sets it aching. Some new desire temptingly tickles and excites his fancy, and imperceptibly evokes a swarm of fresh phantoms. Stillness reigns in the little room. Imagination is fostered by solitude and idleness. It is faintly smoldering, faintly simmering, like the water with which old Matrona is making her coffee as she moves quietly about in the kitchen close by. Now it breaks out, spasmodically, and the book, picked up aimlessly and at random, drops from my dreamer's hand before he has reached the third page. His imagination is again stirred and at work, and again a new world, a new, fascinating life opens vistas before him. A fresh dream, fresh happiness, a fresh rush of delicate, voluptuous poison. What is real life to him? To his corrupted eyes we live, you and I, Nastenka, so torpidly, slowly, insipidly. In his eyes we are all so dissatisfied with our fate, so exhausted by our life. And truly, see how at first sight everything is cold, morose, as though ill-humored among us. Poor things, thinks our dreamer, and it is no wonder that he thinks it. Look at these magic phantasms which so enchantingly, so whimsically, so carelessly and freely group before him in such a magic animated picture, in which the most prominent figure in the foreground is of course himself, our dreamer, in his precious person. See what varied adventures, what an endless swarm of ecstatic dreams. You ask perhaps what he is dreaming of? Why ask that? Why, of everything? Of the lot of the poet, first unrecognized, then crowned with laurels, of friendships with Hoffmann, St. Bartholomew's Night, of Diana Vernon, of playing the hero at the taking of Kazan by Ivan Vassilievich, of Clara Mowbray, of Effie Deans, of the Council of the Prelates, and the Huss before them, of the rising of the dead in Robert the Devil. Do you remember the music? It smells of the churchyard. Of Minna and Brenda, of the Battle of Berezina, of the reading of a poem at Countess V.D.'s of Danton, of Cleopatra et soi Amanti, of a little house in Kolomna, of a little house of one's own, and beside one a dear creature who listens to one on a winter's evening, opening her little mouth and eyes as you are listening to me now, my angel. No, Nastenka, what is there for him, voluptuous sluggard, in this life for which you and I have such a longing? He thinks that this is a poor, pitiful life, not foreseeing that for him too, maybe, sometime the mournful hour may strike, when for one day of that pitiful life he would give all his years of fantasy, and would give them not only for joy and for happiness, that without caring to make distinctions in that hour of sadness, remorse, and unchecked grief. But so far that threatening has not arrived. He desires nothing, because he is superior to all desire, because he has everything, because he is satiated, because he is the artist of his own life, and creates it for himself, every hour, to suit his latest whim. And you know this fantastic world of fairyland is so easily, so naturally created, as though it were not a delusion. Indeed, he is ready to believe at some moments that all this life is not suggested by feeling, is not mirage, not a delusion of the imagination, but that it is concrete, real, substantial. Why is it, Nastenka? Why is it at such moments one holds one's breath? Why, by what sorcery, through what incomprehensible caprice is the pulse quickened? Does a tear start from the dreamer's eye, while his pale moist cheeks glow, while his whole being is suffused with an inexpressible sense of consolation? Why is it that whole sleepless nights pass like a flash, in inexhaustible gladness and happiness, and when the dawn gleams rosy at the window, and daybreak floods the gloomy room with uncertain fantastic lights, as in Petersburg our dreamer, worn out and exhausted, flings himself on his bed and drops asleep with thrills of delight in his morbidly overwrought spirit, and with a weary sweet ache in his heart? Yes, Nastenka, one deceives oneself, and unconsciously believes that real true passion is stirring one's soul. One unconsciously believes that there is something living, tangible, in one's immaterial dreams. And is it delusion? Here love, for instance, is bound up with all its fathomless joy, all its torturing agonies in his bosom. Only look at him and you will be convinced. Would you believe, looking at him, dear Nastenka, that he has never known her, whom he loves in his ecstatic dreams? Can it be that he has only seen her in seductive visions, and that this passion has been nothing but a dream? Surely they must have spent years hand in hand together, alone the two of them, casting off all the world and each uniting his or her life with the other's. Surely, when the hour of parting came, she must have lain sobbing and grieving on his bosom, heedless of the tempest raging under the sullen sky, heedless of the wind which snatches and bears away the tears from her black eyelashes. Can all of that have been a dream? And that garden, dejected, forsaken, run wild, with its little moss-grown paths, solitary, gloomy, where they used to walk so happily together, where they hoped, grieved, loved each other so long and so fondly, and that queer ancestral house where she spent so many years lonely and sad with her morose old husband, always silent and splenetic, who frightened them, while timid as children they hid their love from each other. What torments they suffered, what agonies of terror, how innocent, how pure was their love, and how, I need hardly say, Nastenka, malicious people were. And good heavens, surely he met her afterwards, far from their native shores, under alien skies, in the hot south, in the divinely eternal city, in the dazzling splendor of the ball, to the crash of music, in a palazzo, it must be in a palazzo, drowned in a sea of lights, on the balcony, wreathed in myrtle and roses, where, recognizing him, she hurriedly removes her mask and whispering, "I am free," flings herself trembling into his arms, and with a cry of rapture clinging to one another, in one instant they forget their sorrow and their parting and all their agonies, and the gloomy house and the old man and the dismal garden in that distant land, and the seat on which with the last passionate kiss she tore herself away from his arms, numb with anguish and despair. Oh, Nastenka, you must admit that one would start, betray confusion, and blush like a schoolboy who has just stuffed in his pocket an apple stolen from a neighbor's garden, when your uninvited visitor, some stalwart, lanky fellow, a festive soul fond of a joke, opens your door and shouts out as though nothing were happening, "My dear boy, I have this minute come from Pavlovsk. My goodness, the old count is dead. Unutterable happiness is close at hand, and people arrive from Pavlovsk."